Talking to Cornelius. Conversation 3. You know, I've spent decades looking for you, old man. It's one of the great constants in my life. Fact is, there's something purifying about the business. I've felt the power of that searching crack and strip away second-rate versions of the past, all those one-size-fits-all narratives, loaded with presumption and generalisation, the whole lot set flying like coarse husks in a flax mill. You know that drill, old man. But what have I been looking for in these decades that I've been looking for you? What's the delicate fine thread beneath the coarse husk of ignorance? What do I want? What do I expect? Maybe this is it, this thing we're doing now, ancestral business, this talk that loosely binds the generations, this murmuring that sounds out the places that we've come from. Anyway, enough of that. Back to you, out on the streets of Belfast and surging towards the critical moment of your life. I have to tell you, old man, when it comes to my ancestors, you and your brother James are at the mild end of the criminal spectrum, the kind of petty criminals who would get a firm warning or a weekend of community service these days. But in your day, stealing clothes could result in the same sentence, 7 years transportation, as the crime of assault causing grievous bodily harm, or the crime of abducting a woman. It seems justice had its own inclination to impose a one-size-fits-all narrative in 1843. The bare bones of your crime are recorded in the Downpatrick Recorder on the 14th of October 1843, stealing several items of wearing apparel that belonged to John McMullen of Ballynafae on the 13th of September. So you and James went across to the downside of the Lagan River. Were you on the outskirts of Belfast for some other reason, or was it all part of a cunning, premeditated plan? What was the truth beyond the bare bones of your crime? Had you and James been laid off work at the mill? Was your father George ailing? Were you desperate for rent money? Or did you grab the clothes in an impetuous moment? That's how I've imagined it in the past, you and James running down the road, desperate to get back across the Lagan River and into town before the obligatory pursuing mob grabbed you. A drama of cinematic proportions. Maybe that's more or less what happened. Who knows? The truth is there's a world of possibilities when it comes to motivation and all the human flesh on the bones of your crime and sentencing. The Cork Examiner in 1842 provided the following editorial comment regarding the Irish population. There cannot be a doubt of one of the most mischievous beliefs prevalent among the peasantry of this country, namely, that transportation is not so much a punishment as a change of condition, not for the worse, but for the better. This is not only a grievous delusion, but is in many cases the actual cause of the commission of minor offences against the laws. There was nothing new about the belief that a sentence of transportation was a ticket to a better life. There'd been a parliamentary committee in London back in 1818. Part of its agenda was trying to gauge how effective transportation was as a criminal deterrent. The committee interviewed people who had regular contact with the inmates of Newgate Prison. Benjamin Baker was an Islington engraver and mapmaker who regularly visited the prison to provide Christian pastoral support. He was asked, what effect did the sentence of transportation have on prisoners? I conceive the sentence of transportation is, in general, received among the prisoners as rather a reward than punishment, except where families have been connected, and where wives or children are to be left behind. That occasions quite a different feeling. It then becomes the most severe punishment. In other cases, I've observed that the prisoners rejoice in the prospect of transportation, and it is with the greatest difficulty in the world that that spirit can be restrained. When they go off, they're shouting and rejoicing as though some great achievement has been performed. The former prison chaplain, Reverend Brownlow Ford, presented a similar view. He said he'd observed the impact of the sentence of transportation many times. It was particularly rejoiced at by those who were in a trade. The only grievance was to those who had families or were far advanced in life. The young ones are delighted with it. In general, the old ones are rejoiced at the expectation of meeting their old acquaintances there, whom they've known before. The Newgate prison turnkey, Richard Smart, was also questioned by the committee. In respect to the sentences for transportation, have you found a difference of feeling upon this subject? I think there are many of the young branches, young men from 18 to 20, that are frequently more rejoiced at going than anyways considering it a punishment. You mean that the boys and the young men consider it more as a voyage of pleasure beyond sea? More like a party of pleasure. Is there not a phrase amongst them by which they term it going to sea? I cannot speak to that. I never heard it. These observations mess with the standard narrative of courtroom heartbreak and victimhood. And it's remarkable that these scenes of Australian-bound rejoicing were happening in 1818 and before, when colonial life was a matter of primitive living and rough justice. I always imagined you and James receiving that sentence in the standard, heartbroken manner. Now I don't know. Were you sad or enraged? Or did you rejoice at the news like those young men in England in 1818? I like the idea that there might have been a complicated mixture of emotions in you when the sentence was passed. Something that showed you as more than just a victim of circumstances. Some flickering sense of possibility that would see you seizing opportunities when they finally came along in your future.